Have you ever been invisible in a room full of people who share your blood? I stood there in my rented suit, clutching a glass of champagne I couldn't afford, watching my family celebrate everything I wasn't. The ballroom sparkled with crystal, chandeliers, and white roses. But all I could hear were the whispered conversations about poor Marcus, and how I'd never amount to anything like the rest of the family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Marcus Chen, and at 32, I was the family black sheep at my sister Victoria's wedding. While she walked down the aisle in a designer gown worth more than my annual rent, I was the brother who dropped out of law school. The one who worked nights at a 24-hour diner in downtown Phoenix. The disappointment who'd chosen community. Service over corporate success. But they had no idea what was coming. The whole mess started 8 years earlier when I made the decision that would fracture my relationship with my parents forever. The Chen family had built their reputation on 3 pillars: academic excellence, professional prestige, and unwavering loyalty to family expectations. My father, Dr. William Chen, was a renowned cardiovascular surgeon. My mother, Patricia Chen, held a judgeship on the Arizona Court of Appeals. Victoria had followed the golden path perfectly, Harvard Law. Partnership track at Morrison & Associates, engaged to Bradley Whitman, son of a federal district judge. Then there was me. I remember the night everything changed. It was November 2016, and I was in my second year at Arizona State University Law School. The semester had been brutal: constitutional law, civil procedure, contracts, but I was maintaining a solid B+ average. Not good enough for the Chen standards, but respectable. I was studying for my evidence final when my phone rang. "Marcus, this is Detective Sarah Mills with Phoenix PD. Are you familiar with Alina Rodriguez?" Alina was 8 years old. She lived 3 blocks from my studio apartment, in a neighborhood my parents had warned me to avoid. Her mother worked double shifts at a textile factory. Her father had been deported when she was 4, and she was being raised by her teenage brother who was doing his best but drowning in responsibility. Alina had been found wandering the streets at 2 a.m., scared and hungry. After her brother had been arrested on drug charges, he swore he didn't commit. The state was moving to place her in foster care. She had no other family, no advocates. No one who would fight for her except maybe the law student who'd been tutoring kids at the community center every Thursday night. "She's asking for you," Detective Mills said. "Says you're the only one who listens." I closed my law books, grabbed my keys, and drove to the police station. Lena was sitting in a plastic chair that dwarfed her small frame, still wearing the Disney princess pajamas she'd been found in. When she saw me, she ran over and wrapped her arms around my waist. "Marcus, they want to take me away." But Miguel didn't do anything wrong. He was just trying to get medicine for my cough. I spent the next 3 days researching Miguel's case, visiting him in juvenile detention, and discovering a pattern that made my stomach turn. Miguel Rodriguez, 17 years old, honor student, had been framed by a dirty cop who was planting drugs on Latino teenagers to boost his arrest numbers and qualify for federal grant money. The evidence was there: security footage from a bodega across the street, witness testimonies that had been ignored, a search that violated the Fourth Amendment in 6 different ways. But Miguel had been assigned an overworked public defender who was handling 47 cases simultaneously and had already advised him to take a plea deal. I couldn't let that happen. I withdrew from law school on December 15th, 2016. I used my tuition money to hire a private investigator, spent my savings on filing fees, and moved Alina into my apartment while Miguel's case went through the appeals process. My parents were livid. "You're throwing away your entire future for strangers," my father said, his voice cold with disappointment. "This isn't your responsibility, Marcus. You're not a social worker. These kids don't have anyone else," I replied. "Elena's 8 years old. She shouldn't have to navigate the system alone." "The system works," my mother said, her judge's authority seeping into her voice. "There are procedures, protocols. Can't just decide you know better than trained professionals." But I'd seen how the system worked. Gail was eventually exonerated after 4 months in juvenile detention, but the damage was done. He'd missed half his senior year, lost his scholarship opportunities, and developed anxiety so severe he could barely leave the house. Alina had nightmares for years about being separated from her brother. I never went back to law school. Instead, I threw myself into cases like theirs. I couldn't practice law without a degree, but I could research, investigate, and connect families. With resources, I worked at Jimmy's all-night diner from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and spent my days helping kids who'd fallen through the cracks of the juvenile justice system. My parents stopped inviting me to family dinners. Victoria stopped returning my calls unless she needed something. At holidays, I became the subject they avoided, the cautionary tale they whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear. Marcus could have been anything. I'd overhear my mother telling her colleagues he was bright enough for Harvard, but he threw it all away playing hero. The word hero always came out like a curse. Over the years, I developed a network of contacts, social workers, public defenders, community advocates, even a few sympathetic judges who believed in second chances. I helped dozens of kids, teenagers wrongfully accused of crimes they didn't commit, children aging out of foster care with nowhere to go, families torn apart by an immigration system that prioritized deportation over keeping families together. I wasn't making money. My apartment was a studio with a Murphy bed and a kitchen table that doubled as my desk. I drove a 2004 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles and a passenger door that only opened from the inside. I bought my clothes from thrift stores and ate most of my meals at the diner where I worked, but I was making a difference. Kids who'd been written off by the system were graduating high school, getting into college, staying out of trouble. Families were staying together. The work meant something, even if my family couldn't see it. Victoria's engagement announcement came via text message. No phone call, no family dinner, just a photo of her and Bradley on a beach in Maui with her diamond ring catching the sunlight. The wedding invitation arrived 6 weeks later, formal and impersonal. Addressed to Marcus Chin and guest, even though my parents knew I'd been single for 3 years, I almost didn't go. I knew what it would be like, a room full of successful lawyers and doctors who'd known me since I was a promising pre-law student with a bright future. Now I'd be the cautionary tale, the one who'd chosen idealism over ambition and had that shabby apartment and second-hand suit to prove it, but Victoria was still my sister. And some part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, seeing me there would remind my family that I was still part of them. Even if I'd chosen a different path, I was wrong. The Scottsdale resort was everything I'd expected: marble floors, gold accents, servers in white gloves carrying silver trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than I made in a week. Victoria looked radiant in her custom gown. Bradley looked exactly like the kind of man who'd never had to worry about paying rent. And my parents looked like they were presiding over the social event of the year. I found my assigned seat at table 12, far from the family table, wedged between Victoria's college roommate and Bradley's cousin from Denver. The place card simply read, Marcus Chen, no guest, no acknowledgement that I might have brought someone, just my name printed in elegant script on cream-colored cardstock. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. During the cocktail hour, I watched my family work in the room. My father discussed cardiac procedures with other surgeons. My mother held court with judges and attorneys. Victoria glowed as she accepted congratulations from Phoenix's legal elite. I stood near the bar, nursing my champagne and trying to look like I belonged. That's when I heard it. Is that Marcus? The voice belonged to Judge Harrison, one of my mother's colleagues from the Court of Appeals. I thought he was doing well in law school. My mother's response cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Marcus chose a different path. He's finding himself. Working at a diner, helping troubled youth. We're hoping he'll eventually come to his senses. Judge Harrison made a sympathetic noise. How disappointing. He always seemed so bright. Bright doesn't always translate to wise decisions, my mother replied. Some children insist on learning things the hard way. I sat down my champagne and walked away before I could hear any more. The bathroom mirror reflected a man who looked exactly like what they thought I was, rumpled. Out of place, the family disappointment in an ill-fitting suit. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that in less than an hour, everything would change. The judge who would walk through those ballroom doors wasn't there for the wedding. He was there for me, and when he found me, the entire Chen family was about to learn exactly what their disappointing son had really been doing with his life. The dinner service began with my father's toast. Delivered with the same precision he used in the operating room, he spoke about Victoria's achievements, her partnership with Bradley, and the bright future ahead of them. He mentioned family legacy, the importance of choosing the right path, and building something meaningful with your life. His eyes never once drifted to table 12 where I sat, but everyone understood the subtext. I picked at my salmon and tried to focus on the conversation around me. Victoria's college roommate, Jennifer, was telling Bradley's cousin about her new job at a tech startup. They talked about stock options and venture capital. Languages I'd once understood but had forgotten during my years working the night shift at Jimmy's. "What do you do, Marcus?" Bradley's cousin asked, and the entire table went quiet. "I help kids navigate the legal system," I said, keeping it simple. "Oh, like a social worker, something like that." Jennifer leaned in with the kind of sympathetic expression people reserve for discussing terminal illnesses. "That must be so rewarding. It's wonderful when people find their calling in public service." The way she said public service made it sound like a disease. I nodded and changed the subject, asking about the dessert course. But I could feel their pity settling over me like a heavy blanket. After dinner, the real socializing began. This was where my family truly shined, working the room, building connections, reinforcing their position in Phoenix's professional hierarchy. I watched my mother introduce Victoria to judges and attorneys, saw my father discussing hospital politics with other surgeons, observed the careful dance of influence and networking that had defined my childhood. I found myself gravitating toward the hotel's outdoor terrace where a few guests had escaped for air and quieter conversation. The desert night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights, and the temperature had dropped to something almost comfortable. I was leaning against the railing, finally starting to relax, when Victoria appeared beside me. "You look miserable," she said, not unkindly. "I look realistic," I replied. "This isn't exactly my crowd anymore." Victoria studied me in the dim light. At 28, she'd inherited our mother's sharp intelligence and our father's unwavering confidence. She'd also inherited their certainty that there was only one right way to live. "You could come back, you know," she said. "Again, finish school. Dad still has connections. Could clerk for Judge Morrison, get experience, build a real career." "This is a real career, Victoria. Working at a diner is not a career. Helping random kids with legal problems you're not qualified to handle is not a career. It's ... double quotes. She struggled for the word. "It's what?" "It's self-indulgent. You're playing savior instead of actually building something meaningful." I turned to face her fully. "Those kids' lives are meaningful to me. But what about your life? When was the last time you had a real relationship? When was the last time you bought new clothes or took a vacation or did anything that wasn't about someone else's problems?" She wasn't wrong, and that stung. My last relationship had ended 2 years earlier when Sarah, a fellow law school dropout, turned paralegal. I decided she couldn't handle dating someone who brought work home every night, and that work involved traumatized teenagers and heartbreaking family situations. I'm 32, Marcus. I'm getting married to someone who challenges me intellectually and supports my ambitions. I'm making a partner next year. I own my condo. I have a retirement fund. I have a life plan that extends beyond next week's crisis. Don't you want any of that? I want to sleep at night knowing I'm not part of the problem. Victoria sighed. Sound carrying years of frustration. The problem isn't going to be solved by one person working himself to death in a diner. The problem requires systematic change, policy reform, people in positions of actual power making decisions that matter. People like you? People like I could be? Like you could be? If you stopped sabotaging yourself. We stood in silence for a moment. the weight of our different choices hanging between us. Through the glass doors, I could see the reception continuing. Dancing, laughter, the celebration of a life that made sense to everyone except me. "I miss you," Victoria said quietly. "I miss having a brother I could be proud of." Before I could respond, she was gone. Walking back into the warmth and light of her perfect wedding reception, I stayed on the terrace longer than I should have, watching the desert sky and thinking about the path that had led me here. 8 years of choosing other people's crises over my own stability. 8 years of disappointing my family while telling myself it was worth it. 8 years of wondering if Victoria was right, if I was just playing savior instead of making real change. My phone buzzed. A text from Alina, now 16 and a junior in high school. "How's the fancy wedding? Remember you promised to help me with my college essays tomorrow?" I smiled despite everything. Alina Rodriguez had not only survived the system that tried to swallow her, she was thriving. Straight A's, student body vice president, full scholarship offers from 3 universities. Her brother Miguel had eventually graduated high school, got his GED, was now working as a youth counselor while taking night classes at Phoenix Community College. Another text. This one from Carlos, a 19-year-old I'd helped 3 years. Earlier, when he was facing deportation, despite being brought to the country as a toddler, Marcus got into the ASU engineering program. Full ride. "Thank you for everything." Then another from Maria, whose abusive stepfather had been sending her to school with bruises until I'd connected her family with the right resources. "Graduated nurse training today. Starting at Phoenix Children's Hospital next month. Couldn't have done it without you." My phone kept buzzing. Kids I'd helped over the years, updating me on their lives, sharing their victories, asking for advice. A dozen success stories that my family would never see. Lives that had been changed not through policy reform or systematic change, but through one person deciding to pay attention when everyone else looked away. I was scrolling through the messages when I heard familiar voices from inside. My parents were holding court near the bar, surrounded by colleagues and friends. Even through the glass, I could hear my mother's voice carrying over the music. "Marcus has always been idealistic," she was saying. "Even as a child, he was the one bringing home stray cats and asking why we couldn't fix every problem in the world." Laughter rippled through the group. "We thought law school would channel that energy into something productive," my father added. "But sometimes children insist on learning life's lessons the hard way." Judge Patterson, one of my mother's longtime colleagues, raised his wine glass. "Now, at least Victoria turned out perfectly. One success story out of 2 isn't bad." More. Laughter. I watched my parents smile and nod, accepting sympathy for their disappointing son with the same grace. They'd accept condolences at a funeral. That's when I noticed him, standing near the entrance to the ballroom, scanning the crowd with the focused attention of someone looking for a specific person. Was Judge Raymond Torres. Federal District Judge Raymond Torres, to be precise. He appointed to the bench 3 years earlier by the previous administration, known for his work on criminal justice reform and his particular interest in juvenile cases. Judge Torres was also the man who'd signed the order that saved Miguel Rodriguez from a life-destroying plea deal, the judge who'd written the scathing opinion that led to Detective Morrison's investigation and eventual conviction for evidence tampering, the man who'd become something of a legend in Phoenix's legal community for his willingness to overturn wrongful convictions and hold law enforcement accountable. He was scanning the crowd methodically, and when his eyes found me through the glass doors, he smiled and headed in my direction. My heart started racing. Judge Torres and I had never met in person, though we'd exchanged several letters over the years regarding cases I'd researched. He'd cited my investigative work in at least 3 published opinions, always referring to me as a concerned citizen whose thorough research brought crucial evidence to this court's attention. I had no idea why he was at Victoria's wedding. Marcus Chen. Judge Torres stepped onto the terrace, extending his hand. "I was hoping I'd find you here." Judge Torres. This is unexpected." "I imagine it is. Congratulations on your sisters. Wedding, beautiful ceremony." "Thank you, though. I'm surprised you were invited. Do you know my family?" Judge Torres smiled, and there was something almost mischievous in his expression. "I know your mother professionally, of course. We've served on several judicial committees together." But I'm not here for the wedding, Marcus. I'm here for you. The terrace suddenly felt very small. Through the glass doors, I could see the reception continuing. My family and their guests celebrating Victoria's perfect life while having no idea that a federal judge was standing 10 feet away looking for their disappointing son. I don't understand. Walk. With me, Judge Torres said, leading me toward the far end of the terrace where we'd have more privacy. Marcus, how much do you know about the Presidential Medal of Freedom? It's the highest civilian honor in the United States, awarded to people who've made exceptional contributions to the security or national interests of America. World peace or cultural endeavors. Exactly. And how much do you know about the selection process? I assume it involves a lot of very important people making recommendations. Judge Torres leaned against the railing, looking out at the desert landscape. The selection committee reviews hundreds of nominations each year. Most come from senators, governors, and other government officials. But occasionally we receive nominations from more ... grassroots sources. Citizens who've witnessed extraordinary work being done by people who fly under the radar. My mouth went dry. Judge Torres, I'm not sure what you're suggesting. 3 years ago, Elena Rodriguez wrote a letter to the White House. A 16-page letter describing how a former law student named Marcus Chen had saved her family and countless others through what she called the most important work being done in America today. She included documentation of every case you'd worked on, every family you'd helped, every wrongful conviction you'd helped overturn. I stared at him, speechless. Elena's letter was remarkable, but it was just the beginning. Over the past 2 years, the committee has received 47 additional letters of recommendation for you. From Miguel Rodriguez, from families you've helped, from social workers who've witnessed your impact, from other judges who've seen your research change their rulings. Now the world seemed to tilt. Through the glass doors, I could see my parents still entertaining their friends, still accepting. Sympathy for their disappointing son who'd thrown away his promising future. Judge Torres, I appreciate whatever you're trying to tell me, but I think there's been some mistake. I work at a diner, help kids with homework and legal research. I'm not. Nobody special, Marcus, Judge Torres said, his voice gentle but firm. In 2 weeks, you're going to receive a call from the White House. You've been selected to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom for your extraordinary dedication to juvenile justice and your work helping disadvantaged youth navigate the legal system. The terrace spun around me. I gripped the railing to steady myself. The ceremony will be in 6 weeks. Your entire family will be invited, along with the other recipients. The president will personally thank you for your service to the country. Couldn't breathe. This can't be real. It's very real. And Marcus, everyone in that ballroom is about to learn exactly what their family disappointment has really been doing with his life. Judge Torres straightened his jacket and smiled.
Oh.
Shall we go inside? I believe it's time for me to congratulate your parents on raising such an exceptional son. Judge Torres walked through those ballroom doors like he owned the place. And, in a way, he did. Federal judges commanded a certain respect in rooms full of lawyers and state court officials. Conversations paused mid-sentence as people recognized him, straightened their postures, and tried to catch his attention. I followed, several steps behind, still reeling from what he'd told me. The Presidential Medal of Freedom. 47 letters of recommendation. Elena's 16-page letter to the White House. It felt like someone else's life. Someone worthier than the guy who'd been picking at overpriced salmon an hour earlier. While his family's friends pitied him, Judge Torres. My mother's voice cut through the ambient chatter. She was moving toward us with the practiced grace of someone who knew how to navigate political waters. What a wonderful surprise. Got out. No idea you were coming. Judge Chen, he replied warmly, accepting her handshake. Congratulations on Victoria's wedding. She looks radiant. Thank you. I'm so pleased you could make it, though I must say, this is unexpected. I don't recall sending you an invitation. Judge Torres smiled, that same mischievous smile he'd given me on the terrace. Actually, I'm here to see Marcus. The change in my mother's expression was subtle, but unmistakable. Flicker of confusion, followed by something that might have been embarrassment. Around us, conversations continued, but I noticed several people had started paying attention to our little group. Marcus. My mother glanced at me, then back at Judge Torres. I'm not sure I understand. Your son has been doing some remarkable work in our community. I wanted to speak with him personally. Your father had appeared beside my mother, drawn by the commotion. William Chen, he said, extending his hand to Judge Torres. I don't believe we've met. Judge Raymond Torres, Federal District Court. Dr. Chen, you must be very proud of Marcus. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged one of those married couple looks that communicated volumes without words. Victoria had materialized at my father's elbow, still glowing from her wedding, but now looking puzzled by the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. Proud? My father said carefully. Well, of course we want Marcus to be happy. Naturally, he's happy in making such an impact. Judge Torres continued seamlessly. I don't think I've encountered a more dedicated advocate for juvenile justice in all my years on the bench. My mother's lawyer instincts kicked in. Judge Torres. I think there might be some confusion. Marcus isn't an attorney. He works at a restaurant. He works nights at a restaurant, Judge Torres corrected gently. Days, he's been single-handedly revolutionizing how we approach wrongful convictions in juvenile cases. His research has overturned at least 12 improper convictions that I'm aware of. And his work has been cited in federal court opinions across 3 states. The small crowd around us had grown larger. Victoria's new in-laws were listening now, along with several of my parents' colleagues. I recognized Judge Harrison, the man who'd called me disappointing earlier, edging closer to hear better. Sorry, Victoria said, her voice carrying that careful politeness she used when she thought someone was mistaken but didn't want to be rude. I think you might have Marcus confused with someone else. He dropped out of law school. He doesn't practice law. You're absolutely right, Judge Torres said. He doesn't practice law. He does something far more important. He investigates cases that the system has failed. Marcus, would you mind if I shared some specifics with your family? I think they'd be fascinated to learn what you've really been doing. Every eye in our expanding circle was on me now. Felt like I was standing trial, except I wasn't sure what the charges were, or whether I wanted to be found guilty or innocent. I judged Torres. I don't think this is the time or place. ... Nonsense, my mother interrupted, her judicial authority taking over. If Judge Torres has something to say about your work, we'd all like to hear it. Judge Torres clasped his hands behind his back, assuming the posture I'd seen him use when addressing courtrooms. 3 years ago, a 17-year-old named Miguel Rodriguez was facing 20 years in prison for drug trafficking. The evidence seemed solid. Drugs found in his backpack, a confession obtained after 14 hours of interrogation, and a public defender who advised him to take a plea deal. I watched my family's faces as Judge Torres spoke. Victoria was frowning slightly, trying to connect this story to her understanding of my life. My parents looked politely interested, but skeptical. The case would have proceeded exactly as planned, except someone noticed inconsistencies in the police report. Someone spent 3 weeks tracking down security footage that the police had somehow overlooked. Someone interviewed witnesses that no one had bothered to talk to. Someone built such a compelling case for evidence tampering that it forced us to mount the conviction and investigate the arresting officer. Judge Torres paused, letting that sink in. That someone was Marcus, working for free, using his own resources, spending his nights researching case law and his days tracking down witnesses. Miguel Rodriguez is now studying to be a youth counselor instead of serving hard time for a crime he didn't commit. One case, my father said, though his tone had shifted slightly. That's very admirable, but... 12 cases, Dr. Chen, that I know of personally. Marcus has developed a network of contacts throughout the juvenile justice system. Social workers call him when they suspect wrongful arrests. Public defenders send him cases they don't have time to properly investigate. Other judges have started asking for his research when evidence seems questionable. Judge Harrison stepped forward. Torres, are you saying this young man is doing investigative work without a license? That sounds highly irregular. There's nothing irregular about citizen advocacy, Judge Torres replied smoothly. Marcus isn't practicing law. He's doing what any concerned citizen can do, researching public records. interviewing willing witnesses, and presenting his findings to appropriate authorities. The difference is that he's extraordinarily good at it. My mother was studying me with new eyes, her judicial mind clearly processing this information. Marcus, is this true? Before I could answer, Judge Torres continued. Dr. Chen, Judge Chen, your son has prevented more wrongful convictions than some attorneys manage in entire careers. He's kept families together, helped kids get into college instead of prison, and exposed corruption in law enforcement that might otherwise have gone undetected for years. Agnes? Victoria asked, and there was something almost hurt in her voice. Maybe because he thought you wouldn't understand, Judge Torres suggested gently. Maybe because working at a diner to support this kind of advocacy doesn't look like success to people who measure achievement differently. The silence was uncomfortable now. Around us, other wedding guests were pretending to have their own conversations while obviously listening to ours. I could see Bradley hovering nearby, looking like he wasn't sure whether to approach or retreat. Hey, Marcus, my mother said, her voice softer than it had been all evening. Why didn't you tell us about this work? Would you have been interested? I asked, the question coming out more bitter than I'd intended. Every time I tried to explain what I was doing, you made it clear you thought I was wasting my life. When was the last time any of you asked about my work without suggesting I should be doing something else instead? My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. Victoria looked down at her hands. Besides, I continued, I'm not doing it for recognition. These kids needed help, and I could provide it. It's that simple. It's not that simple at all, Judge Torres interjected. What Marcus has been doing requires an extraordinary combination of legal knowledge, investigative skills, emotional intelligence, and sheer persistence. Most lawyers wouldn't have the patience for it. Most investigators wouldn't have the legal background. Marcus has both, plus something rarer, the willingness to work for nothing except the knowledge that he's making a difference. Judge Patterson, who'd made the comment about one success story out of two earlier, was looking distinctly uncomfortable. Well, this is all very admirable, he said. But surely a young man with Marcus's obvious talents could be making a greater impact through traditional legal channels. Greater impact? Judge Torres raised an eyebrow. Senator, how many wrongful convictions have you personally overturned? I'm not a prosecutor or a judge. How many families have you personally saved from being torn apart by a flawed system? Judge Patterson's face was reddening. Judge Torres, I think you're being unfair. There are many ways to serve the public good. Absolutely true. Marcus has chosen one of the hardest and most thankless ways possible. He's chosen to work without recognition, without pay, and without institutional support, because he saw problems that needed solving and decided he couldn't wait for someone else to solve them. My phone buzzed. Without thinking, I glanced at it. Another text from Alina. Marcus, I just got the call. Full scholarship to Stanford Pre-Law. I'm going to be a lawyer because of everything you taught me about fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. I must have smiled, because Judge Torres noticed. Good news? One of the kids I've been working with just got a full scholarship to Stanford. Alina Rodriguez? Judge Torres asked. I nodded, surprised he knew. Brilliant girl. She's the one who started this whole process, you know? What process? Judge Torres looked around our circle of listeners, then back at me. Marcus, I think it's time your family learned about the letters. What letters? Victoria asked. Over the past 2 years, the Presidential Medal of Freedom Selection Committee has received 47 letters of recommendation for your brother. From Alina Rodriguez, from Miguel Rodriguez, from dozens of families he's helped, from social workers and judges and attorneys who've witnessed his work firsthand. The ballroom seemed to go very quiet. Or maybe that was just the blood rushing in my ears. Presidential Medal of Freedom? My mother repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Highest civilian honor in the United States, Judge Torres confirmed. Awarded to individuals who have made exceptional contributions to the security or national interests of America, to world peace, or to cultural or other significant endeavors. My father was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Marcus. Marcus has been nominated for the Presidential Medal of Freedom? Not nominated, Judge Torres said, his smile widening. Selected. The ceremony is in 6 weeks. Marcus will be honored alongside a Nobel Prize winner, former Secretary of State, and a civil rights leader whose work spans 5 decades. The silence that followed was complete. Even the background chatter from other parts of the reception seemed to have faded away. Victoria's hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide. My parents looked stunned. But he works at a diner, my father said weakly. He works at a diner at night to fund his real work, Judge Torres corrected. Just like plenty of social activists and advocates have worked second jobs to support their primary mission, the selection committee was particularly impressed by Marcus's willingness to sacrifice personal comfort and conventional success to serve others. Bradley chose that moment to approach our group, probably wondering why his new wife looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Everything okay over here?" Victoria turned to him, her voice shaky. "Bradley, my brother is receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom." Bradley blinked. "Your brother who works at the diner?" "My brother who's been fighting wrongful convictions and saving kids' lives while we all thought he was wasting his potential," Victoria said, and now there were tears in her eyes. Judge Torres checked his watch. "Marcus, I should let you get back to the reception. But I wanted to deliver the news personally, and I thought your family should hear it from someone who understands the magnitude of what you've accomplished." He shook my hand formally. "Congratulations, Marcus. This recognition is long overdue." As Judge Torres walked away, I found myself standing in a circle of family members and family friends, who were all staring at me like I'd just materialized out of thin air. The man they'd been pitying all evening, the family disappointment who couldn't get his life together, was apparently important enough to receive. Personal visits from federal judges and recognition from the President of the United States. "Marcus," my mother said finally, her voice thick with emotion, "we need to talk." The reception continued around us, but our little corner of the ballroom had become its own isolated world. Wedding guests danced to music that seemed distant and muffled while my family stood frozen in place, processing the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about me. My mother was the first to break the silence. "Marcus, why don't we step outside? All of us. We need to have a conversation. Away from—" She gestured vaguely at the crowd of colleagues and friends, who were still pretending not to eavesdrop. We moved as a group toward a private sitting area adjacent to the ballroom. Victoria gathered her dress carefully as she sat, Bradley hovering uncertainly beside her. My parents took the couch across from me, and for the first time in years, I had their complete, undivided attention. "How long?" my father asked. "How long have you been doing this work?" "Since I left law school, since Miguel's case." 8 years, my mother said, more to herself than to me. 8 years, and we never knew. "You never asked," I said quietly. Every conversation we had about my life was about what I should be doing instead. Law school, corporate law, making partners somewhere respectable. When I tried to tell you about the kids I was helping, you'd change the subject or suggest I'd volunteer at the hospital auxiliary instead. Victoria leaned forward, her makeup slightly smudged from tears she'd wiped away. "Marcus, we didn't know it was this significant. You made it sound like ... like a hobby, 'cause that's how you treated it. Like something I did to feel better about my real failure, which was not becoming a lawyer." My father ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from my childhood, when he was trying to solve particularly difficult medical problems. "The Presidential Medal of Freedom," he said. "You understand what that means?" "Marcus," my mother said, leaning forward. "People spend entire careers in public service hoping for recognition like this. Supreme Court justices don't always receive this honor. Senators retire without this kind of acknowledgement. I wasn't doing it for recognition. That's what makes it remarkable," Victoria said softly. "All these years we thought you were lost, unfocused, throwing away your potential. And instead, he was saving lives," Bradley said, speaking for the first time since the revelation. As a lawyer himself, he seemed to understand the magnitude of what Judge Torres had described better than the rest of us. 12 wrongful convictions. Overturned. That's extraordinary work, even for experienced criminal defense attorneys. Phone buzzed again. This time, It was a group text from several of the kids I'd worked with over the years, all responding to Elena's news about Stanford. Marcus helped me too. From Carlos. He's the reason I'm in nursing school instead of foster care. From Maria. My family is still together because of Marcus. From David, whose mother had almost been deported 3 years earlier. I showed the screen to my family. This is why I do it. Elena's going to Stanford pre-law because she wants to help other kids. The way I helped her. Miguel is counseling teenagers because he knows what it's like to be failed by the system.
Oh.
These kids are going to change the world, and all I did was give them a chance. My mother was reading the messages, her expression shifting from confusion to something that looked like awe. Marcus, how many children have you helped? I don't keep count. Roughly. I thought about it. Maybe 60 or 70 individual cases. Some were simple, helping kids understand their rights during police encounters, connecting families with resources, explaining legal documents. Others were more complex investigations. 60 or 70, my father repeated. And Judge Torres said you've been cited in federal court opinions? Sometimes my research uncovers patterns of misconduct or procedural violations that affect more than just one case. Judges reference my findings when they're writing opinions about systemic problems. Victoria was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Marcus, do you realize you've probably had more impact on juvenile justice reform than most attorneys will have in their entire careers? It's not why I do it. We know that, my mother said, her voice gentle in a way I hadn't heard in years. That's what makes it so impressive. You've been doing this work for 8 years without seeking credit, without building a reputation, without even telling your family about your achievements, because you made it clear you weren't interested. The words hung in the air between us. My parents exchanged another one of their wordless communications. I saw something pass between them, regret, recognition, shame. You're right, my father said finally. We did make it clear. We were so focused on what we thought success should look like that we never tried to understand what you were actually building. When you dropped out of law school, my mother added, we saw it as giving up. We never considered that you might be choosing something more difficult, not less. Bradley cleared his throat gently. Can I ask something? Why work at the diner? If you're doing this level of advocacy work, there must be organizations that would hire you, pay you properly for these skills. Because organizations have agendas. Funding requirements, political considerations. When I work independently, I can take any case that needs attention. I don't have to worry about whether it fits someone else's mission statement or whether it might upset potential donors. But the personal cost, Victoria said. Shh. Marcus, you're living in a studio apartment, driving a car that's older than some of the kids you help, wearing thrift store clothes. Don't you want more? More what? More money? A bigger apartment? Nicer clothes? I gestured toward the opulent ballroom around us. Victoria, this is beautiful. But Elena getting into Stanford, Miguel becoming a counselor, Carlos studying engineering, those victories feel bigger to me than any material success I could achieve. My mother was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. When she spoke, her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. We failed you, didn't we? As parents, we completely failed to see who you really are. You didn't fail me. You just didn't understand me. No, my father said firmly. We failed you. We were so invested in our vision of your future that we never bothered to learn about your present. We let our disappointment blind us to your actual accomplishments. The music from the reception swelled as the band launched into another song. Through the doorway, I could see other guests dancing, laughing, and celebrating Victoria's perfect wedding day. But here in our private alcove, something more important was happening.
Ow.
My family was finally seeing me clearly. The ceremony, Victoria said suddenly. The Medal of Freedom ceremony? When is it? 6 weeks. We'll be there, my mother said immediately. All of us. We'll be there to watch you receive the recognition you've earned. And after that, my father added, we'd like to learn more about your work. Really learn. Not to fix it or improve it or suggest alternatives, but to understand what our son has been accomplishing while we were too proud to pay attention. I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. For 8 years, I'd carried the weight of my family's disappointment alongside the satisfaction of my work. Tonight, for the first time, Those two things didn't have to be in conflict. There's something else, I said. Judge Torres mentioned that this recognition might open doors, create opportunities for funding, maybe even policy changes that could help more kids. I might not be working alone much longer. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given me all evening. Good, because what you've been doing is too important for just one person to handle. My phone buzzed one more time. This message was from Elena, but it was different from the others. Marcus, I just saw the news online. You're getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom? Why didn't you tell me? I'm so proud of you. I'm crying in the library, and people think I'm crazy. I showed the message to my family, and for the first time in 8 years, they smiled when they read about my work, instead of sighing with disappointment. She's right to be proud, my mother said. We all should have been proud years ago. When we returned to the reception, something had shifted in the atmosphere. Word travels fast in a room full of lawyers and judges, and the news about the Presidential Medal of Freedom had spread like wildfire through the wedding guests. Conversations paused as we walked by, and I caught fragments of whispered discussions about the Chen boy, an extraordinary recognition, and who would have thought? Judge Patterson approached us first, his earlier dismissive attitude completely transformed. Marcus, I owe you an apology. I had no idea about the scope of your work. Congratulations on this incredible honor. Before I could respond, he was joined by Judge Harrison, who looked genuinely embarrassed. Young man, I fear I spoke out of turn earlier. Your mother has every reason to be proud. Victoria slipped her arm through mine as more colleagues approached. Let them congratulate you, she whispered. You've earned this. But the person I was most curious to see was Daniel Fletcher. Remember him? The man my parents had tried to force me to marry in the original story. Except in this version, there was no Daniel Fletcher at all. Instead, approaching our group with obvious reluctance was someone far more significant to my story, Detective James Morrison. Morrison was the corrupt officer whose evidence tampering I had exposed 3 years earlier during Miguel's case. He'd been convicted, served 18 months in prison, and lost his pension. Seeing him at Victoria's wedding was like encountering a ghost from my past. Marcus, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I heard the news. Congratulations. The conversations around us quieted. Everyone in Phoenix's legal community knew about the Morrison case. It had been front-page news when a decorated detective was brought down by evidence uncovered by a former law student working out of a diner. Detective Morrison, I replied, matching his neutral tone. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm working in private security now. Wedding security, corporate events, trying to rebuild. He paused, seeming to struggle with something. Look, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but what you did, exposing what I did, it was the right thing. The admission hung in the air between us. Morrison had destroyed evidence, planted drugs, and ruined lives to boost his arrest statistics. His conviction had triggered an investigation that overturned dozens of cases and led 2 policy changes throughout the Phoenix Police Department. Those kids you saved, Morrison continued. They deserve better than what I gave them. Miguel Rodriguez, the Martinez family, all of them. I was angry at you for a long time, but he shook his head. You did what you had to do. My father was watching this exchange with fascination. Here was concrete proof of my impact. A corrupt officer admitting his guilt and acknowledging that my work had served justice. I appreciate you saying that, I told Morrison. It couldn't have been easy. No, it wasn't. But facing the truth never is. Morrison nodded to my parents and walked away, leaving behind a silence that spoke volumes. My God, my father said quietly. You brought down a corrupt police officer? I brought down a corrupt police officer who was destroying kids' lives, I corrected. Corruption was the problem, not the solution. Dr. Sarah Williams, one of my mother's closest friends and a family court judge, had been listening to our conversation. Marcus, I've been following your work for years without realizing the connection. The Rodriguez case, the Martinez deportation appeal, the Wilson custody case. That was all you? Among others, yes. I've cited your research in at least 6 of my own rulings. Your investigative work has influenced family court decisions across the county. She turned to my parents. Do you understand what your son has accomplished? Changed how we approach juvenile justice in Phoenix. Colleagues gathered around us, and suddenly I found myself at the center of a crowd that hung on every word. These were people who'd dismissed me hours earlier, and now they were treating me like some kind of celebrity. Tell us about the White House ceremony, someone said. What's next for your advocacy work? Have you considered writing a book about your experiences? The attention was overwhelming. I'd spent 8 years working in shadows, avoiding publicity, focusing solely on the cases and the kids who needed help. This sudden spotlight felt surreal. Victoria sensed my discomfort and smoothly intervened.
Nice.
I think Marcus has answered enough questions for one evening. This is supposed to be my wedding reception, remember? She was smiling as she said it, but I could see the emotion behind her eyes. My sister was proud of me, genuinely proud, perhaps for the first time since we were children. Actually, I said, looking around the circle of faces, there's something I'd like to say. The group quieted, waiting. 8 years ago, I made a choice that disappointed my family and confused my friends. I walked away from a traditional path to do work that seemed thankless and financially unstable. Tonight, I learned that choice led to recognition I never expected and never sought. I paused, gathering my thoughts. But the real measure of this work isn't the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's Elena Rodriguez getting into Stanford. It's Miguel becoming a counselor. It's Carlos studying engineering instead of sitting in prison. It's dozens of families staying together because someone took the time to investigate whether justice was really being served. The crowd was completely silent now. I won't tell you this to diminish the honor I'm receiving. I tell you this because every one of you has the power to change lives. You're judges, attorneys, doctors, business leaders. You see injustice every day, and you have resources I could never access. The question isn't whether problems exist. They do. The question is whether you're willing to do something about them. Judge Williams nodded slowly. What do you need? Resources, funding, volunteer assistance. Right now, I need to get through the next 6 weeks without letting this recognition go to my head, I said, earning some laughter. But after the ceremony, when the spotlight fades, I'll still be doing this work. And if any of you want to join me, there's always more work than one person can handle. Several people approached me individually after that, offering assistance, asking for more details about specific cases, wanting to know how they could help. Dr. Amanda Foster, a pediatrician, mentioned seeing too many kids with injuries that didn't match their parents' explanations. Judge Michael Santos talked about cases where he suspected evidence problems but lacked the resources to investigate thoroughly. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, my family gathered near the entrance to say goodbye. The transformation in their attitudes was remarkable, where there had been embarrassment and disappointment a few hours earlier. Now there was pride and genuine interest in my work. Marcus, my mother said, would you be willing to speak at the next judicial conference? I think your perspective on system failures would be valuable for other judges to hear. And maybe you could consult on some of our more complex custody cases, Judge Williams added. Your investigative skills could help us make better decisions for children. My father was quieter, but when he pulled me aside, his words carried more weight than any public praise. Son, I spent 30 years in surgery thinking I was saving lives one patient at a time. But what you've done? You've saved lives and changed systems. You've prevented future victims, not just treated existing ones. He paused, his voice becoming thick with emotion. I'm sorry it took me 8 years to see it. Victoria hugged me tightly before getting into the limousine that would take her and Bradley to their honeymoon suite. I love you, Marcus. The real you, not the version I thought you should be. As I watched the wedding party drive away, I realized that the evening had changed more than just my family's perception of me. It had changed my own understanding of what I'd built over the past 8 years. The work would continue, but now it wouldn't be invisible. The recognition would bring opportunities I'd never imagined, resources I'd never had access to, and allies I'd never expected. My phone buzzed one final time. A text from Alina. Marcus, I just realized something. You didn't just save my family. You showed me how to save other families. That's your real legacy, all the people you've inspired to keep fighting. Standing in the parking lot of the Scottsdale resort, still wearing my rented suit, I smiled at the desert sky. Tomorrow I'd go back to my studio apartment, put on my Jimmy's Diner uniform, serve coffee to late-night customers while planning my next investigation. But everything had changed. The family disappointment was gone. In his place stood someone my family could finally see clearly, someone who'd chosen the harder path and made it count. The Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony was still 6 weeks away, but the real recognition had happened tonight, in a ballroom full of people who finally understood what I'd been doing with my life, and somehow that felt like a greater victory. 6 weeks later, I stood in the East Room of the White House wearing a suit that actually fit me, a gift from my parents who insisted that receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom required proper attire. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same people who'd been embarrassed by my thrift store wardrobe were now proud to be sitting in the front row of the most prestigious ceremony in America. The transformation in my life since Victoria's wedding had been dizzying. The local news had picked up the story of the diner worker turned Presidential Medal recipient. And suddenly everyone wanted to know about the Phoenix man who'd been fighting injustice from the shadows. The Phoenix New-Times ran a feature article titled "The Unlikely Hero of Juvenile Justice." The Arizona Republic profiled 3 families I'd helped, before and after photos. It told stories more powerful than any words, but the real changes were more substantive than media attention. Dr. Williams had made good on her offer to help. She'd connected me with the Arizona Children's Foundation, which provided funding for a proper office and a full-time assistant. No more researching cases at Jimmy's Diner between serving coffee and cleaning tables. Maya Patel, a recent Arizona state graduate with a degree in social work, had joined me as an investigator and case coordinator. Together, we'd already taken on 12 new cases in 6 weeks. Judge Santos had referred to complex custody cases where he suspected evidence tampering, and my research had uncovered a pattern of falsified psychological evaluations that led to a broader investigation. The corrupt evaluator had been affecting custody decisions for years, separating children from fit parents based on fabricated reports. My parents had kept their promise to learn about my work. My father had started volunteering at the free clinic where many of my families received medical care. And my mother had begun mentoring young public defenders, sharing insights about how to spot inconsistencies in evidence that might indicate problems with cases. Victoria and Bradley had returned from their honeymoon, with plans to start a pro bono legal clinic focused on juvenile justice. "I want to be part of the solution," Victoria had told me. "I spent too many years building a career that impressed people instead of helping them." Now, standing in the White House among Nobel Prize winners and civil rights leaders, I felt the weight of how far we'd all come. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." The room rose as President Martinez entered, her presence commanding immediate attention. I'd seen her on television countless times, but being in the same room felt surreal. This was the person who'd signed the order naming me a recipient of America's highest civilian honor. Today, we gather to honor individuals whose contributions to our nation embody the very best of American values. President Martinez began. These recipients have dedicated their lives to service, to justice, and to the belief that one person can make a profound difference in the world. She spoke about each recipient, Dr. Elizabeth Harper, whose medical research had saved thousands of lives. Former Secretary of State Robert Kim, who'd negotiated peace treaties that prevented wars. Civil rights activist Dorothy Washington, whose 6 decades of advocacy had transformed voting rights across the South. Then she turned to me. Marcus Chen represents something uniquely American: the belief that justice should not depend on wealth, status, or institutional power. For 8 years, Mr. Chen has worked tirelessly to ensure that our legal system serves all children, not just those with advantages. His investigations have overturned wrongful convictions, exposed corruption, and kept families together. The president paused, looking directly at me. Mr. Chen's work reminds us that heroism often wears ordinary clothes, works ordinary jobs, and changes the world one case at a time. His dedication to justice, conducted without fanfare or expectation of recognition, exemplifies the spirit of service that makes America great. When my name was called, I walked toward the president on unsteady legs, the weight of the moment. Standing in the White House, representing not just my own work, but all the kids and families who'd trusted me with their stories, was overwhelming. President Martinez placed the medal around my neck, its weight surprising and significant. "Thank you for your service to our nation's children," she said quietly, "meant only for me. Your work matters more than you know." The reception following the ceremony was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Members of Congress, Supreme Court, justices, and cabinet officials mingled with the recipients and their families. But the conversations that mattered most to me were with the other honorees. Dorothy Washington, now 83 and using a walker, sought me out specifically. "Young man, I've been fighting for justice for 60 years. I want you to know something what you've done. Working alone without institutional support, that takes a special kind of courage. Thank you, Mrs. Washington. Your work paved the way for everything I've been able to accomplish." She smiled, her eyes bright with intelligence and experience. "The work is never finished, Marcus. But each generation builds on what came before. You're building something important." Dr. Harper, the Nobel Prize winner, was equally generous with her time. "I've read about your cases," she said. "The scientific approach you take to investigation, the way you test hypotheses and follow evidence. That's real research methodology applied to justice. Have you ever considered publishing your findings academically?" The idea hadn't occurred to me. I've always focused on individual cases rather than broader patterns. But you've identified systemic problems. Your work on evidence tampering, your documentation of racial bias in juvenile arrests, your analysis of plea bargain, coercion, that's groundbreaking research that could influence policy at the national level. Secretary Kim joined our conversation, bringing decades of diplomatic experience to bear on my situation. "Marcus, have you thought about what comes next? Its recognition creates opportunities, but it also creates responsibilities." What do you mean?" "You now have a platform that reaches far beyond Phoenix. People will listen to you in ways they wouldn't have before. How do you want to use that influence?" It was a question I'd been grappling with since the news broke. The phone calls had started immediately. Foundations wanting to fund my work, universities offering teaching positions, advocacy organizations seeking partnerships. The temptation to scale up, to build an institution, to become a recognizable voice for juvenile justice reform was enormous. But I kept thinking about Elena, about Miguel, about all the individual kids whose stories would get lost in policy papers and institutional agendas. "I want to stay connected to the cases," I told Secretary Kim. "Whatever comes next has to keep me close to the families who need help." "Smart approach," he said. "The moment you lose touch with individual stories, you lose the thing that makes your work powerful." My family had been watching these conversations with fascination. Victoria approached during a lull, looking radiant in her navy dress. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Being honored alongside people whose names will be in history books." "Surreal, but also right somehow." "I like all those nights at the diner." Those cases that seemed hopeless, they were leading somewhere after all. They were leading here. To this moment, this recognition, this platform for bigger change. I looked around the room at presidents and justices and Nobel laureates, at my parents talking animatedly with other families, at Maya taking notes as she spoke with foundation representatives about funding opportunities. "Victoria, can I tell you something? The night of your wedding, when Judge Torres first told me about this honor, I thought it was some kind of mistake. I couldn't understand how helping a few dozen kids could warrant this kind of recognition. And now I realize it was never about the numbers. It was about proving that the system can change one case at a time. And every wrongful conviction we overturned, every family we kept together, every kid who got a second chance, those aren't just individual victories. They're proof that justice is possible if someone cares enough to fight for it." Alina had flown in from Stanford for the ceremony, and seeing her in her freshman year confidence, talking easily with senators and cabinet members, reminded me why the work mattered. She wasn't just surviving the system anymore. She was preparing to change it. "Marcus," she said, pulling me aside, "I've been thinking about what I want to do after law school." "Oh, I want to start a foundation." something that connects law students with cases like mine, like Miguel's. Give future lawyers real experience fighting for kids who can't fight for themselves. The idea was brilliant. Law students eager for practical experience, kids desperate for competent advocacy, and a structure that could scale the kind of work I'd been doing alone. Alina, that could change everything. That's the idea. You saved my family, Marcus. Now I want to save other families. That's how this work continues, not just through one person, but through everyone that one person inspires. As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing alone for a moment in the East Room where I'd received the medal. The magnitude of the day was settling in. But so was something else. The understanding that this recognition wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The Presidential Medal of Freedom wasn't just honoring what I'd accomplished in 8 years of working alone. It was launching what could be accomplished in the years ahead with resources, with allies, with a platform that could amplify the voices of kids like Alina and Miguel and all the others who'd been failed by a system that was supposed to protect. My phone buzzed. A text from Maya, who'd stayed behind in Phoenix to handle the cases that couldn't wait for ceremonies and celebrations. Marcus, just got a call about a 14-year-old in Tucson. Sounds like another evidence tampering situation. When you get back, we have work to do. I smiled, tucking the phone away. The medal around my neck felt heavier now, weighted not just with honor, but with responsibility. Tomorrow I'd fly back. To Phoenix, back to my cases. Back to the work that had brought me here. But I wouldn't be going back as the same person who'd left. The family disappointment was truly gone now, replaced by someone my parents could be proud of, someone my sister could look up to, someone who'd proven that choosing the harder path sometimes leads to extraordinary places. The real measure of this honor wouldn't be the ceremony, or the media coverage, or the doors it opened. It would be whether it helped me save more kids, keep more families together, prove again and again that justice isn't just an ideal, it's something worth fighting for. One case at a time. 2 years after receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, I stood in the lobby of the Marcus Chen Center for Juvenile Justice, watching Alina Rodriguez address a room full of law students, social workers, and community advocates. The center occupied 3 floors of a renovated building in downtown Phoenix, funded by a coalition of foundations, individual donors, and government grants that had materialized after the White House ceremony. Alina, now in her junior year at Stanford Law, was explaining the fellowship program she'd designed. The Chen Fellows spend their summers working on active cases under supervision. But they're not just observing, they're doing real investigative work that makes a difference in kids' lives. I watched from the back as she fielded questions. With the same sharp intelligence she'd shown at 8 years old when she'd first asked me to help save her brother. 23 law students from universities across the country had applied for the 10 fellowship positions. The waiting list was growing. The goal isn't just to train future lawyers, Elena continued. It's to create a network of advocates who understand that justice requires more than legal knowledge. It requires the willingness to dig deeper, to ask harder questions, and never accept easy answers when a child's future is at stake. Maya Patel, now the center's executive director, joined me at the back of the room. In 2 years, she'd grown from a recent graduate helping me organize files to a skilled administrator managing a staff of 12 full-time employees. The center handled over 200 cases annually, with a success rate that had attracted national attention. "How's the Tucson expansion coming?" I asked quietly. "Ahead of schedule. We'll have the satellite office open by January. Judge Martinez down there says. She's already identified 15 cases that need our attention." The center's model was proving scalable. Satellite offices in Tucson and Flagstaff allowed us to serve families across Arizona, while partnership agreements with similar organizations in California, Texas, and New Mexico were extending our reach. Further, the University of Chicago Law School had reached out about creating a similar program, using our training materials and case protocols. But the real validation came from the kids themselves. Miguel Rodriguez, now 25, ran the center's peer counseling program. Kids who'd been through the juvenile justice system worked with new cases, providing support that went beyond legal advocacy. Miguel's own journey from wrongfully accused teenager to youth counselor had become a template for others. Carlos, the engineering student who'd texted me after getting into ASU, had graduated with honors and was now designing technology solutions for the center. His app connecting families with legal resources had been downloaded over 50,000 times and was being adapted for use in other states. Maria, the nursing student, worked part-time at the center while pursuing her RN degree, providing medical assessments when suspected abuse or neglect cases weren't being properly investigated by official channels. The ripple effects kept expanding. Victoria had indeed started her pro bono clinic, which now worked closely with our center on complex cases requiring both investigative work and traditional legal representation. She'd taken a leave of absence from Morrison and Associates to focus on public interest work, a decision that had shocked her former colleagues but felt inevitable to those who knew her transformation. My parents had become unlikely advocates themselves. My mother used her position on the Court of Appeals to mentor young judges on recognizing signs of systemic bias, while my father had established a medical clinic specifically serving families involved in custody disputes where health issues were factors. The day's presentation concluded with Alina introducing the center's newest initiative, a research partnership with 3 universities to study the long-term outcomes of children who'd been helped by our interventions. Early data suggested that kids who received proper advocacy were 60% more likely to graduate high school and 75% more likely to avoid future contact with the justice system. We're not just changing individual lives, Alina explained to the audience. We're proving that early intervention works, that justice can be both efficient and humane, and that investing in children's futures pays dividends for entire communities. After the presentation, I walked Alina to the small office she used when visiting from Stanford. The walls were covered with photos, not of legal precedents or famous lawyers, but of kids she'd worked with over the past 2 years. Children who'd received proper advocacy, families who'd stayed together, teenagers who'd avoided wrongful convictions. "You know what I realized today?" Alina said, settling behind her desk. 8 years ago, when you first helped my family, you weren't just saving Miguel and me. You were creating the possibility of this. She gestured around the office, toward the center, bustling with activity beyond her door. "You created the possibility of this," I corrected. "That letter you wrote to the White House, your idea for the fellowship program, your vision for how this work could scale, that's all you. But it started with one person who decided individual stories mattered more than career advancement. That's still what drives everything we do here." She was right. Despite the growth, the recognition, the institutional support, the centers, work remained grounded in the same principle that had guided me 8 years earlier. Every child deserves someone who will fight for them, investigate their case thoroughly, and refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. My phone rang. Maya's voice was urgent but controlled. "Marcus, we just got a call from Albuquerque. A 16-year-old named David Santos. His public defender thinks there's evidence tampering in his case, but she doesn't have resources to investigate. Family heard about our work and drove 12 hours to ask for help. What's the timeline? Plea hearing is scheduled for Monday. If he takes the deal, he'll serve 5 years for a crime his lawyer thinks he didn't commit." I checked my watch. Friday afternoon. If we were going to help David Santos, we had 72 hours to uncover evidence that could save him from 5 years in prison. I'll drive down tonight. Can you get Carlos started on digital forensics and see if Alina can postpone her flight back to Stanford until Tuesday?
It's already on it.
Miguel's coming too. David's family is originally from Mexico. Miguel thinks his Spanish will help with witness interviews. I hung up and looked at Alina, who'd been listening to my side of the conversation. Without a word, she opened her laptop and started canceling weekend plans. "Just like old times," she said, smiling. "Not quite. This time we have resources, backup, and institutional support. But you're right, it's still about one kid who needs help." As we prepared to leave for Albuquerque, I thought about the speech I'd given at the White House ceremony 2 years earlier. I'd talked about justice being possible when someone cares enough to fight for it, about individual cases adding up to systemic change, but standing in the Marcus Chen Center for Juvenile Justice, surrounded by fellows and staff members and volunteers, all preparing to drive through the night to help a kid they'd never met. I realized something more profound had happened. The work had multiplied itself. Lena wasn't just following my example. She was improving on it, creating systems and structures that could outlast any individual advocate. The kids we'd helped weren't just grateful recipients of aid. They were becoming advocates themselves, extending the reach of justice further than I could have imagined working alone. David Santos would get the help he needed, just as Miguel and Alina and Carlos and dozens of others had. But more importantly, David would someday help another kid who would help another, creating an expanding network of people who understood that justice wasn't a privilege to be purchased but a right to be defended. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Saw the news about the Albuquerque case. Bradley and I are driving down tomorrow to provide legal backup if needed. Proud to be part of this family, all of it. Another text from my mother. Read about David Santos in the news.
Your father and I are praying for his family.
Call if you need anything from the court system. One from my father. Son, watching what you've built reminds me why I became a doctor. Sometimes saving one life changes everything. Drive safe. As our small convoy prepared to leave Phoenix, Maya, driving the mobile research unit Carlos had designed, Miguel and Alina carpooling in Miguel's hybrid, me following in my newer but still modest sedan, I felt the weight of how far we'd all come. 8 years ago, I'd been the family disappointment. The law school dropout working nights at a diner while trying to save one kid from a corrupt system. Tonight, I was leading a team of dedicated advocates to help another kid. But I wasn't working alone anymore. The Presidential Medal of Freedom hung framed in my office. But it wasn't the medal that mattered. It was Elena's leadership, Miguel's wisdom, Carlos's innovation, Maya's vision, Victoria's legal expertise, my parents' unexpected activism, and the dozens of other lives that had been touched and transformed and recruited into the cause of justice. David Santos didn't know it yet. But he wasn't just getting help with his case. He was about to become part of something larger, a growing movement of people who believe that every child deserves a champion. Every case deserved thorough investigation, and every family deserved someone who would fight for the truth. The family disappointment was gone, replaced by something better, a family of choice, bound together not by blood or obligation, but by shared commitment to ensuring that justice was more than just a word carved in courthouse marble. As we drove into the desert night, heading toward Albuquerque and David Santos, and whatever evidence we might uncover, I smiled at the thought of Victoria's wedding. That night had changed everything, not because of the recognition or the medal, or the transformation in my family's perception, but because it had proven that truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Judge Torres had been right when he said everyone in that ballroom was about to learn what their family disappointment had really been doing with his life, but none of us could have predicted what would grow from that revelation. The best stories don't end with recognition or awards or happy families reconciled. They end with the promise that the work continues, that the next generation will carry it forward, and that justice is always possible when enough people decide it matters. David Santos was waiting for us in Albuquerque. And after David, there would be another kid, and another, and another. The work was never finished, but it was no longer invisible. And that, I thought as the desert highway stretched ahead of us, was exactly how it should be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.